Thank you so much for joining us today for Leading with Integrity, Peloton's approach to inclusive philanthropy. I'm joined today by my colleague, Brianna, who's going to be helping out behind the scenes and running the slides. Hi, Brianna. For those of you who might not be familiar with Pledge 1%, just a quick note to say that we are a nonprofit that works to inspire, educate, and empower every company to leverage its assets to be a force for good. If you want to learn more about getting your company to join our global movement, please check out Pledge 1%, that's all spelled out as one word, .org. Just some quick house rules before we get started. We're going to keep everyone on mute today. I know you understand why we're doing that. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat or head on over to our Pledge 1% community to follow up after the webinar with any questions or conversation. All right, let's get started. So first, I want to take this opportunity to quickly introduce our four speakers today. First up, Erin, Cyenar, Managing Advisor, Corporate Social Impact at Tides. With nearly 20 years of foundation experience in both the nonprofit and for-profit sectors, Erin provides deep expertise in philanthropy and corporate social impact. Her resume includes building large strategic investment programs from the ground up to the implementation of smaller impact efforts, such as employee engagement or consumer activation efforts. She's worked with several impact-focused companies that are also Pledge 1 members, including Zoom, Sephora, Okta, Best Buy, Google, and lots more. Next up, Alicia del Toffoli. I'm sorry, I'm sure I butchered that. I was so stuck on your first name because we share the same spelling of our first names, but you say it completely different. But that's okay. Your way's better. I get it. Alicia, totally cool. Alicia brings over 15 years of experience in the social impact sector, including her work in nonprofit programs, management, development, and governance and corporate social impact strategy. Alicia co-leads Tide's corporate social impact team and holds her own portfolio of corporate partners seeking to create lasting social change. Her portfolio includes partners focused on climate justice, tech for good, Black liberation, the LGBTQIA+ community, women's mental health, international development, impact investing, crisis response, and more. Could there possibly be more? There's more. Prior to Tides, Alicia was a managing consultant at BDO FMA, consulting with nonprofits and foundations on social impact strategy, financial stability, board governance, and trust-based philanthropy. She was also a founding member of Funders for Real Change, a groundbreaking multi-year funder collaborative that has led to lasting systemic change in breaking the nonprofit starvation cycle. Next up, Alia McCants is the social impact lead at Peloton. In her role, Alia leads the development and execution of strategies aimed at addressing systemic inequities in physical and mental wellness, leveraging Peloton's wide-ranging resources to bring about social change. She has an extensive background in education, including her leadership at both the Relay Graduate School of Education and the Match School. Her commitment to social justice has been recognized through her selection as a PARA Fellow and membership in the Aspen Global Leaders Network. She is a proud alumna of Spelman College and Columbia Business School and an active member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. She is also the proud mom of twins, which as a twin mom myself, I can say is proof positive of her tenacity and resilience, two qualities that serve you very well in the social impact space. And finally, we're also going to be hearing today from David McGhee, Chief Executive Officer of the Steve Fund. David is an experienced change agent and servant leader in the nonprofit, government, higher education, and philanthropic sectors. He's dedicated to empowering marginalized communities and strongly advocates for the well-being of children, youth, and families. He has held leadership roles at the Schultz Family Foundation and the Skillman Foundation, and he has designed, developed, and delivered strategies, programs, and initiatives at both the national and local levels. In his spare time, and I'm kidding about that, doesn't sound like he has any spare time, he is an adjunct professor at Oakland University and Mott Community College. So thank you all for joining us today. You know, we are truly grateful for you all giving your time and sharing your experience today. So, in the world of social impact and philanthropy, you know, we often hear various terms and acronyms thrown around like ethical grant making and inclusive philanthropy. So we just wanted to start today by grounding ourselves in the definition of inclusive grant making. And to help us with that, I'm going to turn things over to Erin and Alicia from Tides.
Hi, thank you so much for having us today. And Alicia, I completely understand. My last name produces many fun pronunciations. So Erin and I are So thrilled to be here today. We work closely with many members of Pledge 1% as part of our work with Tides. So it's great to see familiar faces and some new ones as well. And we just wanted to share a little bit about Tides, but in the interest of time, this next slide, we'll move past this and we'll just include this in the follow-up deck. But I just wanted to name that Tides is a nonprofit and philanthropic organization dedicated to advancing social justice in a variety of ways. So I'll move on to the next slide. About a bit about our approach to impact. We make grants all around the world to charitable organizations with a variety of missions, budget sizes, languages, and currencies. We believe in the active role that partners can and should play in shifting powers to communities that have historically been denied it. We also help our partners design and realize collaborative, trust-based social impact initiatives. We bring our own networks that include proximate leaders and partners aligned with our mission and values. We also offer a wide range of innovative solutions, including impact investing, employee match programs, consulting engagements, consumer activations, and more. And we finally bring a technical grant-making expertise so we can give practical guidance to help our partners maximize impact. So there's a lot I could say about inclusive philanthropy, so I will try not to. But as you can imagine, there's very rich conversation we can have about all of this. So we're looking forward to that further on today. But just I'll get into some high-level principles of inclusive philanthropy. We bring these in our approach to this work. We also advise our partners on these as well. And ultimately, we believe that philanthropy will be more strategic and impactful if funders approach their relationships with grantee partners from a place of trust and collaboration. So we'll start with participatory grant making and centering community voice. This can encompass a wide range of models, but at its core, this approach to funding seeds decision-making power about grants, the very communities impacted by the funding decision. It's definitely flipping on its head the dynamic that we've seen historically with philanthropy. This can include having independent advisory councils in your grant making, engaging your employee resource groups to help guide your grant making, and listening to grassroots organizations and movement leaders during times of crisis. So I'll get into a couple of these. We have supported partners in building out independent advisory councils. These are oftentimes made up of community leaders, movement leaders, and folks with lived experience to help guide your grant making. And this is a way to truly center community voice. Now, I will add, if you're going to engage the community, you need to center the community. So truly listen to the guidance and feedback that you're hearing, build deep relationships with those leaders, compensate folks for their time, and give your team enough space in your decision-making that folks can truly be engaged. On a similar note, we also have partners who reach out to their employee resource groups to help inspire their grant making and help inform their crisis response grant making. So this is a phenomenal way to build employee engagement, boost morale, and tap into the lived experience of your team. So for example, we have quite a few partners with staff based around the globe. And during times of climate events or crises, they'll reach out to those staff for advice on local aid organizations to donate to. So they're not just making grants to the typical huge NGOs like Red Cross or UNICEF. Again, I'll add a note here. Before you reach out to your employees for this kind of guidance, make sure you've also done your own research. Make it clear that you're not relying on them to do your job for you. But this is the core tenet of centering community voice. It is not their responsibility to take on this lift for you because you're ultimately owning your role in educating yourself, but it's an opportunity for them to share their lived experience to help guide that decision. Centering community voice can also include investing in the community where your company has a footprint. So one of my partners has a sustainable factory in Kenya, and they will make significant grants to community-led organizations in that same city in Kenya. And that's their way of really deepening their relationship there. And they have deep, lasting relationships with local community leaders. So I'll move on now to building relationships and going beyond the grant. As a former grantee, I cannot tell you how much it means to grantees to have direct lines of communication with their funders. There's so much you can do to support your grantees beyond the financial contribution. So this can include grantee collaboratives, connecting grantees with other doers and donors, and more. And at Tides, we absolutely help our partners do this. And now I'll get into the practical. So we always encourage our partners to make multi-year grants when possible. I know I don't need to explain this, but imagine how much better grantees can plan for the future if they know what their revenue looks like. So this allows them to make long-term plans, be more creative with their big ideas, and have greater impact. And I can tell you personally how difficult it is to design a strategic plan for an organization when next year's revenue is a large zero, right? So think about making multi-year grants when you can. Also, when you're granting to 501(c)(3s, make it general operating support. Give your grantees the money and trust that they know how to spend it. No one knows their business like they do. If you're giving to non-501(c)(3s, you legally have to restrict the grants in order to be compliant with IRS law, but you do have control over how you restrict the grants. So we ask that you not require any reporting of the grantee beyond what Tides is already collecting, which is only what's legally required. We also ask that you set a reasonable indirect cost rate. So we all know the nonprofit starvation cycle is when nonprofits are underfunded or heavily restricted by their funders, so they can't build a rainy day fund or invest in the future. And there's all kinds of data that shows that the nonprofits that survive economic downturn are the ones with those reserves. And as we all know, nonprofits led by people of color are the most underfunded in this area and the least likely to have sufficient rainy day funds or funding for capital campaigns because of heavy funder restrictions. So just don't be that funder. Set a reasonable indirect cost rate and give your nonprofits the room to grow and thrive. So these are just a few best practices around inclusive grant making. We have many examples of these, but we appreciate being able to be here and we look forward to the conversation. And I will hand it back to Brianna.
Thank you, Alicia. I'm actually going to jump in here and say, now that we understand inclusive philanthropy a little bit better, let's talk about how this works in practice. And I'm going to turn things over to Alia now to talk us through how Peloton approaches their corporate philanthropy. So Alia, over to you.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you, Alicia, for outlining those principles so clearly. Hopefully as I go through my presentation, you all will be able to see how we've incorporated many of those principles and the work that Peloton does. So again, good morning, good afternoon to those who are in other time zones. My name is Alia. I've been at Peloton for 3.5 years, and I sit on our amazing ESG team. And I have the privilege of leading Peloton social impact efforts, which include our philanthropy, our nonprofit partnerships, and how we use our Peloton superpowers to make the world a more equitable place. So on the next slide, when I say, make the world a more equitable place, here's what I mean. Peloton social impact sits at the intersection of physical fitness, mental wellness, and communities experiencing systemic inequities. And while those communities look different in each of Peloton's markets, so the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and Germany, our social impact program is tailored to work alongside our nonprofit partners to remove barriers to accessing well-being. This is why we do what we do. On the next slide, I talk about how we do what we do. So when we created our strategy, we first engaged our team members and asked a lot of our stakeholders, our members, our senior leaders, our instructors, our ERGs, our retail team, where does it make most sense for Peloton to invest our resources? And the consensus was physical fitness and mental health are where most of our assets lie. So this is where we have the most capacity to make impact. So once we had that, we then undertook a human-centered design study, and we understood, which communities in each of our markets are experiencing the greatest disparities in health due to systemic barriers in their respective countries. And then, this is where community voice comes in. We actually underwent focus groups, and we said, hey, what are the barriers that you're facing when it comes to accessing physical fitness or mental health? Their answers have formed the foundation for our framework and guide our investments of our resources. So we invest in community and organizations that create a sense of connection and community, those organizations who create inclusive spaces, those who effectively share knowledge and resources like the Steve Fund, and those that amplify experiences of representation and belonging. So community voice really impacted how we carry forward our work and how we shape our investments moving forward. The next slide, this is whom we partner with. So our global suite of partners are advancing access to and engagement with physical fitness and mental health in the communities on which they're focused. And very important to us, they're also led by members of those communities. You'll get to meet one of them in just a few moments to hear about how we partner with them. So Peloton doesn't take generally inbound applications for grants. Instead, we found these partners by conducting a landscape sweep once we had our strategy in place, understanding who was having really significant impact already. And then we knocked on their doors and said, hey, we're Peloton. We have X assets. We have our instructors and our funding and our retail showrooms and our products. What can we co-create together that would help to advance your mission? And so we didn't come in with a formed opinion about what we should do. We said, we would like to co-create something together with you. Most of these partnerships were launched in 2021. And so at this stage, they're 3 years old now and have matured. It's a highly relational approach. It's a highly co-creative approach. And we think that this enables a lot of value, not just for our partners, but for Peloton. So on the next slide, I talk about, how this approach creates value. So by centering authentic and co-created impact, we not only first and foremost reach the communities that we aim to serve, we get to provide ongoing support to our partners. And Peloton is we're very privileged that we have a wide diversity of people in our member communities. And this allows us to really show up during key cultural moments, but then also throughout the year. So we can genuinely say, we don't just celebrate and support Black people in the month of February in the US or October in the UK. We support the health and empowerment of Black people year round through our partnerships. We don't just show up for the LGBTQIA+ communities during Pride in June. We show up for those communities year round through our partnerships. And that generates a lot of value, not just for our partners, but then also for Peloton. So you might be asking, how do we measure the impact of these partnerships? Well, I'm going to walk you through our impact framework. And Brianna, I apologize in advance. There's going to be a lot of clicking through this part. But this is a top-level overview. So the story is, with Peloton's value-driven financial and in-kind support, our partners or supporters carry out their work so that individuals who experience systemic inequities have the knowledge and awareness that inspires actions to transform attitudes and beliefs, thus empowering individuals to become the best versions of themselves. And so if you were to create a theory of change based on how we're investing our resources, this would be the high-level articulation. And then we have measures for each of these actions. So what do we measure? Well, we measure the support that we're giving, partner-specific inputs, and then we measure the outputs that come from those activities. Then we have a menu of options that our partners use to measure changes in knowledge, attitudes, and awareness, and then those lead up to feelings of well-being and empowerment. Then lastly, how do we measure? So I won't go into too much detail on this. It will be included in the post follow-up. But I will say that, for the curious, we have measures around whether our grant making aligns with our intentions. So we ask our partners for feedback. Are we being as supportive of you as possible? Are we being good partners to you? As well as measures like output, number of people reached, or the outcome metrics, changes in knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors. So our next big goal is to reach 500,000 individuals by the end of next fiscal year, so June 30th, 2025, through the use of community investments. So that's what we're investing in our partners, community activations, and then our targeted Peloton class content. And for us, reach plus experience equals ultimate well-being. So if you reach this number of people, it's not just enough to have the touch points with them. They also have to have a positive experience with well-being in order to effect that impact framework that we just showed. So here's how it looks with the Steve Fund. Through our years-long partnership now, we've supported the Steve Fund to expand their relationships at MSIs and HBCUs, including my alma mater at Spelman. And they've been able to offer workshops and support groups and annual convenings, and we're able to surpass their grant goals. They've also partnered with us to provide mental health expertise through a series of panel conversations for Peloton's corporate wellness clients and our members. And we really like this mix of activities because one, we get to show up authentically and with expertise with a stakeholder group who's important to us. But two, we get to amplify the work of the Steve Fund. And I think I heard you say, Alicia, introducing them to doers and donors. This is one of the key ways in which we can do that. So by lifting the Steve Fund into these spaces with other corporate funders, we hope that we might be able to create value for them and connections. So I will now turn it over to David McGhee to talk more about the Steve Fund and what a co-created inclusive philanthropic approach looks like. But before I do, here are the takeaways. Here are the takeaways. If you remember nothing else from my slides, remember these. First principle at Peloton, philanthropy should be done with our partners, not to them. So centering their voices in your goals creates deeper and more authentic and more meaningful impact. Two, find your sweet spot. So the sweet spot for Peloton is health, mental wellness, and community. But the sweet spot should really be at the intersection of what your brand's superpowers are, what the timely needs are, and then what your partners are seeking to achieve. And then lastly, it really helps to have a true north. Once you have a firm vision and a strategic plan, it's not only simple to determine which investments are or aren't in scope, but it also enables because you know what needs to be held true at the core. And in this current business environment, flexibility is a key survival tactic. So I'm very excited to turn it over to David, who will talk about how this looks from the perspective of a nonprofit partner.
Thank you so much, Alia, and thank you all for joining to participate in what we like to call a courageous conversation to learn more and advance your work. My name is David McGhee, and I have the distinct pleasure and honor of serving as the Chief Executive Officer of the Steve Fund. And oftentimes in the social space, and I'll tell you a little bit about our mission, but oftentimes in the social space, the big question is what keeps you up at night, right? And people think about their work or their business model. But I'll tell you, and as you all can see the Steve Fund's mission on the screen here, this is less about what keeps me up at night, but more so about what wakes me up in the morning, right? Like what gets me up and keeps me moving is our mission to promote the mental health and emotional well-being of young people of color through critical moments of transition. So as they transition into higher education, throughout their higher education experience, and also as they transition into the workforce. What's interesting about this work is that when we center our work on young people of color, that's not an effort to be exclusionary, but it's to really understand and recognize and react to the data that young people of color experience mental health and mental health challenges in a very different and a unique way than their counterparts. So that's how we focus our work, and our partnership with Peloton is that it's a true partnership. It's something that's a true relationship. It's something that's mutually beneficial. And I definitely want to underscore that as you think about the work that you all do and the partners that you all have, it's mutually beneficial. And the best way that I can describe this, and I think about this in our partnership with Peloton, is imagine you're in the middle of the ocean. In the middle of the ocean, you have your feet there, and each foot is on a sheet of ice. It's frozen. One sheet of ice, your left foot, imagine that being the true intent of your business, right? Like the business model, the business philosophy, why the business was started in the first place. You definitely have to have that. Your right foot is actually the needs of the communities in which you work and the communities in which you serve. Your job is to not fall in the water, right? You definitely want to honor the intent of the business that you have, but also be good stewards and be good neighbors and be good community partners, right? Whether that's defined by a local geography or if it's just defined by who you all serve, right? So we're fortunate enough to be a national organization, and we're fortunate enough to benefit from Peloton, who's a company that works nationally and internationally. So we try to provide a unique balance so we can make sure that we don't fall in the water, but also partner and seek partnerships with organizations such as Peloton and not position them to have to move too much so they fall in the water. So we're grateful for that. So what does that actually mean? The Steve Fund operates against three strategic priorities. One is to transform environments, right? So we want to make sure that we work to transform the educational and organizational and workplace environments that young people of color may find themselves in. We recognize, respect, and honor that there are many, many organizations that work directly with young people, equipping them, resourcing them, building them up to be everything that they can be. We take the baton at that point because we understand that while the young person is built up, they often enter into environments and structures, and we want to make sure that the environments that they find themselves in, whether it is higher education, whether it is the workplace, whether it is another kind of social youth serving organization, while the young people are being built up, we intentionally and unapologetically work with environments, pair them with mental health experts and clinicians to transform their environment so they'll be better prepared to receive young people of color when they walk through their doors. The second thing that we aim to do is provide resources and skill building opportunities directly to young people of color and their families. This is important because if all of us were in the same room and I asked you to raise your hand, if you knew someone who may have navigated or battled with some mental health challenges, all of our hands would go up. What often isn't clear is how does the caregiver receive the tools and the resources they need to support that person, right? It's one thing for us to know of an individual that suffers or struggles with the realities of mental health, It's another thing with making sure that we're equipped with the tools and the resources to be good brothers, to be good sisters, to be good friends, to be good neighbors. So we work to provide resources and skill building opportunities directly to young people and their families so they can have additional tools in their toolbox to promote and also protect the mental health of young people of color in their lives. And then lastly, we work to shape the field, right? And what does that mean? That means conversations such as this. That means engaging in research opportunities. That means in doing things that remove the stigma related to the term and the notion of mental health, especially for people in communities of color. So ultimately, we want to ensure that more young people across the US feel supported, feel loved, feel engaged, and they feel as if they have access to the resources that will further benefit them. And sometimes that looks like programs. Sometimes it looks like policy. Sometimes it looks like practice. I'll add a note here. Oftentimes we think of big change coming through legislation. And there are some legislative wins that all of our work needs, but there's legislative policy, but there's also administrative policy. There's things that individuals and institutions can do right away, starting tomorrow, that don't require any type of legislative act, right? So we want to make sure that we can provide that direct impact. The outcomes that we lead to are increased protective factors, right? We understand and fully believe and want to lift up and promote that all things related to mental health aren't at crisis stage, right? Everyone doesn't receive a diagnosis or has been labeled bipolar or schizophrenic. There is that reality, but the protective factors also create those opportunities to meet young people at a point before they could reach a cliff, right? Oftentimes it's meeting and supporting basic needs. All of us know individuals who may be, and I'm using this example because it's real, but that may be a car payment away or a support of a rent payment away, right? Just for keeping it all together. So sometimes it's just meeting or transportation, right? Meeting and supporting basic needs actually serve as a protective and a preventative factor before someone actually has a mental health crisis, reducing the stigma, and then making sure that more and more young people of color can adapt and cope with the stresses and the changes of reality in their current lives. And then lastly, again, our vision is that every young person of color feels fully supported. And the reason that the trifecta of the peers, the families, and communities are important, because we understand that all young people come from different walks of life, right? And many of them find their support in their family structure. Many of them find it outside of the home. So we want to make sure that more and more of them are equipped and they feel supported, and that they reach and live happy and healthy and productive lives. The last thing I'll say here before I give you my takeaways is that the overall success, health, and well-being of any person in this country has multiple touch points. So we aren't the solution, but what the Steve Fund offers is our contribution to the larger result. So this is our contribution in ensuring that environments, communities, and also national conversations are shaped in such a way that they are prepared to support, meet the needs of young people of color. So if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide. So 3 keys from a nonprofit's perspective to partnering with corporate funders is focus on things that are transformational, not just transactional, right? Like focus on that which is transformational, not just transactional. Many people talk about it. Philanthropy is in charity, or partnership is in charity. It's really justice, right? Like how do we focus on those things that are transformational and not just transactional? Secondly, prioritize outcomes, not just outputs. Outputs are great. We need them. They're phenomenal, but prioritize the outcomes. And many of you all may be thinking, what does that mean? Give me an example. I'm so glad you asked. An example of outputs versus outcomes could be, an organization that says, we do pre-college programming and we've taken 50 kids on 25 college tours and we purchased a laptop for everybody. That's great. Those are phenomenal outputs. What happens as a result of that? Like, what is the outcome as a result of that work? And then lastly, which is probably the most fun, remain curious. Remain curious. Always interrogate, always dig deep, and remain curious of what could actually be with two or three organizations coming together to change the world. I'll leave you all with a charge. The charge by way of a question. And it's something that I use internally and something that I would love to encourage you all to use. Ask yourself often, what can we do that wouldn't be done unless we did it? Right? What can we do that wouldn't be done unless we did it? And that question, as I close, does not come from a place of arrogance, but it comes from a place of responsibility, right? Each of us hold a unique space in the corporate world, in the philanthropic world, in the nonprofit world. So we should ask ourselves, what is it that we can do to change the world that wouldn't be done unless we did it? And I fully believe that it will transform your work. So thank you all so much for being here. And thank you, Peloton, for partnering with the Steve Fund to help us advance our mission.
Well, thank you, David, for closing us with inspiration and certainly gives me something to wake up for in the morning. So thank you for that. Really appreciate that. We're going to move into kind of the Q&A and discussion portion of our webinar. So if you have questions, please put them into the QA function or the chat. You could chat me directly if you feel a little shy about asking your question. And I'm going to start us off with a question. Speaking of courageous conversations, David, I'm going to come back to you just for a second here. The power dynamic between funders and nonprofits is powerful. We all know that. I'm curious if you've ever had to challenge or maybe just nudge a funder to align more with some of these core principles of inclusive philanthropy. Have you ever run into pushback with other funders, not Peloton? And how did you sort of lead them to think differently about how they should fund you?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. The power dynamic is a bit different. I mean, funders often find themselves in spaces where their jokes are funnier and things of that nature, right? Because they know the first thing, whether they ask for it or not. So I have ran into those challenges, and one thing that I would offer that has been beneficial is actually, and actually Alia actually laid it out, right? I think a true partnership goes above and beyond the dollar. Right. So oftentimes what a funder can do, what the corporation can do, as I like to call it, is knowing when to scream and knowing when to whisper. Right. So there are things that corporations and funders can scream about, right, that we just can't. And vice versa, there are things that they can whisper about and get more traction than us screaming. So what does this look like very concretely? I've worked with a funder in the past. No, let me flip that. I used to be a funder. So I've been in a situation where, absent stroking a check for an organization because it just really didn't align, the dollars didn't align, but the advocacy did, right? So there was an organization that, requested some funding, was not able to fund them, but was able to pen an op-ed at a later point, which actually undergirded and advanced their mission work. The op-ed wasn't about this particular organization individually, but it was about the mission work that they lead. As a result of that op-ed, not because David McGhee is so smart, but it was because David McGhee had the platform to whisper and scream at the same time. As a result of that, they were able to generate way more money than they would have gotten if we would have stroked the check. So I would say whenever you find yourself in that kind of contentious moment, take a step back and explore what else might be possible beyond a check.
That's awesome advice. Thank you. I'm curious, from the folks at Tides or Alia, have you ever had to whisper or scream? How do you sort of share with your peers some of these best practices?
Well, first, to the power dynamic, I will say that that's one of the first things that I had to learn when David says that like all your jokes are funnier and people just think that you're I came from being on the grantee side into this role at Peloton, and someone described it really beautiful to me. She said, hey, like you walk into a room with the tiger, and even if the tiger is, because I was saying like, but I'm Alia, like I'm so nice, like I try really hard. She's like, yeah, but you're in a room with the tiger. And even if the tiger is very nice, like it's still a tiger. And so you need to know what it means to be the tiger in the room and operate accordingly. And then, use your power at the tiger for good and not for evil. So for us, we have very focused, very limited resource. I said that we don't get a lot of, we don't really take inbound applications for support, but we get a lot of them. We get a lot of inbound applications for support because a lot of people see themselves in the Peloton mission and want to be a part of it. And so I have, to David's point, I have like made connections for organizations that we can't fund. I'm just like, hey, like this isn't aligned with Peloton's focus, or Peloton doesn't have the resources to support this, but the work that you're doing, I see the clear line to impact. let me introduce you to another organization who does fund in the area that you're doing, or like, let me, feel free to use my name when you enter this room, and tell them that, Alia from Peloton says this is a solid idea. And sometimes those things are even more powerful than the, limited amount of funding that we can provide. And then separately, we think about expanding beyond the dollar. We try really hard to use our non-monetary assets as intentionally as we do our monetary assets. So like, monetary assets are really just table stakes. Everything else is, how are we, bringing the C fund into this conversation as an example, like putting them in front of our corporate wellness partner as experts, integrating them into our content so our members understand who they are and what the work that they're doing and how they can support it. Like, all of these take creativity, and I think David talked about curiosity. What else could we do that is uniquely Peloton? How else can we use our assets to advance the work of our partners? Thinking really creatively about that has led to some really, I think, inspiring and cool outputs and outcomes for us.
Awesome. Alia, this question is for you. Inclusive philanthropy can be seen as less efficient sometimes because it can require more time, right? And more resources to engage kind of a broader range of stakeholders and to potentially co-create solutions with those stakeholders. You mentioned that you did focus groups and research as an example. Has your leadership ever questioned the sort of efficiency of this approach? Like, what's really the business case you make back to those questions? If you're getting those questions, maybe you're not. But I just assume that everybody this world gets those questions from time to time. What's your case for practicing inclusive philanthropy?
I mean, I will say I've been incredibly fortunate at Peloton to not have to answer these questions from our leadership. I think, the Peloton leadership is in general aligned around the idea that our social impact and our business impact are a virtuous cycle that just feed each other. And so I don't have to defend it I'm very fortunate to not do that. And I also, if I did have to defend the business case, I think what we have done and proven as we have built our strategy is creating authentic, meaningful impact over time. Not only is the right thing for the world, but also insulates the impact against different fluctuations in the business. It insulates the business against reputational risk of whether it's greenwashing or pinkwashing or blackwashing, or we get to say we were never the company that put up a black square in July of 2020 and let that be it. We're the company that allows our work to do the speaking for us. And I think that is meaningful and allows us to show up in a way that our members really appreciate. Peloton describes ourselves as a purpose-driven brand. We're seeking to advance access to wellness for everybody. And so the work that I do is seen as supportive of that goal. It's not perfect. There are gaps that we want to close, but the seeds have already been planted for that conversation. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that the short answer is authentic impact is a better investment in the long term than transactional.
That's great. And I love that your executive team is all bought in and that you've been that way from the start. That's incredible to hear. Erin, do you have other thoughts about maybe companies that aren't quite where Peloton is in terms of their sophistication?
Yeah, I absolutely. Thanks for lobbing that over to me. Because you are correct. Absolutely. Tides in our advising work, we get companies at every stage of that sort of corporate social impact journey. And certainly it's not always one as aligned as Peloton, for sure. As Alicia said, Tides is all about shifting power and centering equity in everything we do. And we have those deep connections between doers and donors, right? So we fiscally sponsor a number of charitable organizations, and I want to say that Pledge 1% is certainly, one of them. But they're doing that work on a shoestring, right? Often underserved, under-resourced, all of that, and they're going after these major critical social justice issues like climate crisis, democracies dying, fundamental human rights, etc. And I'm a bit of a broken record with many of these companies, but there's a business case around businesses aren't going to do well in a dying democracy. Businesses aren't going to do well in a planet that's dying, etc. So I like to make a connection with the core business, obviously, because you need to have that business purpose. And Alia really outlined, making sure that that connection is made. But I also think this idea of inclusive philanthropy and why your company needs to do it also resonates with your employees, with your consumers, with your brand reputation, etc. We certainly know that younger folks, especially, I think it was Benevity did in 2000, maybe 2023. It was like 80% of employees believe that businesses should step up and take action on racial justice and on social issues, etc. So they're 80%. That's huge. So I think there's a business imperative there to really lead on some of those issues and be innovative about them. And when you do inclusive philanthropy and you really center the voices of community, etc., we know that those organizations that are for and led by are innovative. Problems and solutions are found in the same place. So certainly you're getting at impact, not just output, but impact, certainly as well. And maybe you've talked about it at Pledge 1%, but we're in this pendulum swing, I believe, of a little anti-DEI, right? Anti-ESG and that chilling effect, etc. But there's a business case in 2045, the country is on track to be mostly people of color. So I always feel there's a business case certainly there as well, along with that moral and ethical imperative. Also, there's definitely a business case.
So just to follow up on that, we had a question that was sent to me. Alicia, I think maybe you would be the best person to answer this one. For practitioners, corporate philanthropists who are just starting out, who don't necessarily have a mature or sophisticated grant process like Peloton, what are some simple steps that they can take to incorporate sort of this inclusive approach into their philanthropic efforts? So if they're just getting started, they don't have a lot of staff, they're trying to maybe do this off the side of their desk. How can you break it down and make it sort of easier for them to do this work? And easier is the wrong word. Fundamental is maybe the better word. How do they make this fundamental to the work that they do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think when you're getting started, it can feel really overwhelming because you want to do everything at once. So some advice that I give to organizations that are just getting off the ground and just trying to piece this together is really centering the work in their core values. So what do you want to stand for? What is most important to you? One of my partners is their founder really struggled with mental health and ultimately lost the battle with it. And so they have committed all of their social impact work to women's mental health. And for them, that was a very simple, this is what we need to put our dollars behind, is because we know exactly how threatening this work is. One of my other partners is a large sustainable clothing brand that's centered all around the world. And so for them, climate justice, straightforward. That's the cause that they need to fight for, because that, from a business point, obviously affects their work. And from being, an outdoor apparel company that's founded by a very happy hippie, the climate's the most important thing for them. And so I think looking at what your organization, your core values, and what's most relevant to where you work can be a great place to start, because it's easiest to make the business case with those particular social impact values and topics. And, think about building a team that doesn't just tell you what you want to hear, right? Steve Jobs said, I don't hire people to tell me what I want to hear. I hire people to tell me what they know. So make sure that you are surrounding yourself with members of the community, leaders, with folks who understand what the work that you're doing and can give you great advice. And I say, just take it slow. Don't try to do everything at once. As you kind of get your feet under you, you can start getting more robust in the work that you do. And that's a great thing about Tides that I love for our partners, is partners join us at all phases, where they can come here and sort of incubate ideas and then grow. And then they are doing more complex things. They've got sort of more specific perspectives of what they want to work on. We see them really evolving how they think about their social impact strategy. So I would say surround yourself with the best teams possible, get advice everywhere you can, and try to really center the work in your core values.
Can I offer something? Oh, Aaliyah, I felt like, no, you go. I saw you come
No,
up.
I was going to say that I saw you unmute and I wanted to hear what you said. So I'm glad that you came.
Oh, no. Thank you so much. I was jotting some notes as you were talking. So I would just offer 3 things to kind of undergird that, starting with the values piece that she lifted up. There are opportunities, depending on how big or small your institution is, to create something in the spirit of my wife is an IP attorney, so I'm trying not to come up with like a very cool name that she would trademark, but something like rapid response or values driven, like something to where you would be surprised, even equipping or empowering your staff with a small amount where they can actually determine where it goes, so long as it's aligned with the values, right? So even if it's $250 or $500 or whatever annually, and to the team, here's a charge for you all to invest and support companies that align with our values, and then they feel empowered to make a contribution, that will actually go a long way on employee morale and things of that nature. And you actually have your team members engaging in community in a way that's different than just advancing the business proposition. So that's 1. 2, if your organization is extremely large and you don't have the capacity to do that, you could put some small resources to the side and create like quarterly pitch competitions to where everybody on the team actually can bring in a charity of choice. They put the charity of choice down on the napkin or a thing, you put it in a hat, and then quarterly, the team actually meets, you draw those charities out. And if your charity is drawn, you draw out the top 3, and then the team member who put that charity in, they actually stand before their colleagues and pitch, I actually think we should support big brothers, big sisters in our community, and this is why. And then you could have like 3 tiered amounts to where you actually make a contribution, and then it makes it fun and engaging for the staff. And then the last thing is not something to do, but just a reminder. Philanthropy comes from the Greek word philos and anthropos. Like, it means love of humanity, love of mankind. So it's not just reserved for the Pelotons of the world who have this major brand. It's not just reserved for the WK Kellogg's of the world who have. Philanthropy is everybody's business. And I'm telling you, I don't care how big or small your organization is, you're already doing philanthropy if you love humanity, if you love your community. So I just wanted to remind you that this doesn't have to be earth-shattering, because the true definition of philanthropy is love of humanity, love of mankind. So anything that you do to kind of advance that mandate, you're moving in the right direction. So it doesn't have to be huge and big and splashy. Again, your job is just to not fall in the water.
Alia, did you want to have the last word there?
No, I think that that's a perfect last word for us.
Awesome. Well, we are at time. We do have some additional resources we're going to share out with everybody. We're going to share out the deck and the recording of this great conversation. Thank you all so much. I am personally inspired by the way that all of your organizations and companies are working so thoughtfully to make change in the world. And I just really appreciate you sharing your experience with us today. I'm going to go ahead and let our speakers jump off. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to put up a poll just to see how you